I want to encourage everyone today, especially for the groundbreaking historic work that we began in 2012. As the founding members of AKU, you were the believers that a dream could ignite the hearts and minds of a people. That dream could be so compelling that it could inspire not just a people, but the entire global community. We believed in a Korean dream even before that phrase was coined. That is why I applaud you. Give yourselves a round of applause. Well, that Korean dream has been given a voice. And that vision has been given a framework. And only 5 short years after its founding, not only is it inspiring the people of South Korea, but it's inspiring the entire world. As I explained in the opening session of many of these plenaries that we had dealing with a lot of the top thinkers on the Korea issue from around the world, I explained that the unification of the Korean Peninsula is the only viable option given the changing geopolitical context in which we're living today. With American interest on the peninsula on a level that has historically never been the case, leading the entire global community on the issue of denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula. The level of global attention on Korea in my lifetime, there is no comparison to the level of attention that currently is on the peninsular issue today. One of the things that we as Koreans need to understand, especially here in South Korea, is that the status quo solutions of the past is no longer relevant given this changing geopolitical context. This is very important for you to understand because it'll give you a sense of how important this work of AKU has been and will be at this crucial juncture in the history of the Korean people. In 2012, when I envisioned this coalition, it was based upon hard-won lessons learned during the Sunshine Policy, where South Korea engaged the North. As you know, it was my father in 1991 that opened the door to North Korea. At that time, when he met Kim Il-sung, he made it very clear that the engagement with the South should lead to the unification, the peaceful unification of the Korean Peninsula. He basically fell back to the history of the Korean people, because the history of the Korean people pre-1945 was a history yearning for independent nation aligned to the Hongik-Ingan ideals that the Korean people dreamed of in building an ideal nation to serve all of mankind. Through the failures of the Sunshine Policy, I realized that the problem did not exist with the North. The problem existed with the South and the failure of Southern leadership in terms of an endgame strategy for what engagement should and would lead to. More importantly, the South Korean, not only government, but also all the institutions within South Korea that engaged with the North did not have an over-encompassing, not only endgame, but more importantly, cooperation in terms of engagement with the North. So with the Sunshine Policy of engagement, as the South engaged the North played the South off of each other. And the rest is history. That is how the North Korean regime received the financing to continue that regime as well as their nuclear program. Engagement without an end game, what is the conclusion, was the problem. Therefore, if engagement was to begin again with the North, the South has to have clarity as to what the endgame strategy should be. That endgame strategy should be the peaceful unification of the Korean Peninsula. What is more important is that the civic organization, corporations, NGOs, faith groups need to have cooperation as to what that not only what that endgame strategy should look like, but also in how they engage the North. Thus, the significance of AKU. Because in this room, we have the breadth of South Korean society, from religious leaders to civic leaders to NGOs to humanitarian aid groups, etc., etc., etc. All the sectors of South Korean society is gathered here today. And unlike the 1990s, we are united around one vision, the Korean dream. And now, with the launching of the One-K-Global campaign, which will be an international effort, we are planning on launching a Korean Dream movie that will stimulate the international community as to the plight of the Korean people. Through the Korean Dream, I frame the issue of the separation of the Korean people as a civil rights issue that is an anathema to our Korean history. This is significant because, like all the civil movements that brought about the changes within the 20th century, such as India's move for national sovereignty and breaking the colonial yoke of powers such as Great Britain, to the end of apartheid in South Africa, to the civil rights movement in the United States, the civil rights issue captured the imagination of the international global audience. But in the 21st century, the civil rights issue of this age is the unification of the Korean Peninsula. It will bring an end to the terrible chapter that the Korean people had to endure during the 20th century of colonialism. It will bring to an end the terrible chapter of the divided Koreas because of the Cold War realities. And it will bring to the fore, not only within the Korean people, but in the global community, the Korean dream that had been our ancient mythology that defined us as a people and that inculcated in us our sense of national purpose, not only in creating an ideal nation, but most importantly, to serve all humanity. We will also inspire a new generation of young people, not only in Korea, but around the world, that identify with the plight and the dreams of the Korean people through the avenue of music, pop music. So we will have a series of major global international events utilizing all the elements of culture, from music to painting, etc., 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 to engage the young people around the world as to the dream of the Korean people. In 2015, we launched the 1K Korea concert series, which was a spectacular success here in Korea. And actually, at that time, one of Korea's most famous composers actually wrote one of the unification songs that we used at that time, which created an entire genre of Korean popular music on the theme of unification. So I was told that the ringtone, the dial tone of the Ministry of Unification in Korea actually uses that song. So let's give them a round of applause.
큰 박수를 부탁드리겠습니다.
Well, we actually now created a Korean dream song, not just for the Korean audience, but the international global community. And we're planning on having a major mega concert gathering all the top artists from around the world, as well as top artists here in Korea, for a mega gala in 2019 celebrating the vision of the Korean dream. So as you can see, you know, when I was a young boy growing up in Korea, I used to look to the stories of what Mahatma Gandhi did in India to transform that nation and eventually realize that nation's dream of developing its own sovereign state. Although I'm not an Indian, I also used to admire the work of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. in his plight, in his fight for civil rights. Although at that time I was not an American. Also, I admired the plight and the fight of Nelson Mandela to end apartheid in South Africa. Although I'm not a South African. In the 21st century,
그러나 21세기에 있어서
we will make the Korean dream the inspiration for not only Koreans, but a new generation. Aspirational young people that would look to the precedents of peace set by their predecessors. And today, gathered in this room, we have such men and women that was willing to dream the big dream and willing to take on the big fight. The fight to bring truly an end to the tragedy that happened on the Korean Peninsula and to allow the Korean people to finally fulfill their national destiny and dream to create one unified nation. There are many international participants gathered in this room today. Just like I explained, although I was not an American, I admired Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Although I'm not a South African, I admired Nelson Mandela. Although I'm not an Indian, I admired Mahatma Gandhi.
제가 미국
Well, in the
사람이
21st century, let us all be Koreans and dream the dream of one Korea. Thank you very much.
대단히 감사합니다.